Yes guys, Dom here, the founder of the Alpha 21 program, and today we're going to be talking about how you can optimize your natural fat burning systems so that you can lose fat with ease. Now, it's no secret that for most guys, as they kind of move towards 35 and beyond, losing fat seems to be a harder task. Most guys seem to struggle to shift fat in the same way, and they seem to put it on a lot more readily. So we're going to be talking about why that is, because despite what most people will kind of think, that isn't just a natural byproduct of the aging process. The reason why fat loss feels so much harder as you progress through age is because, for the most part, people neglect their health, drinking alcohol, living under chronic stress conditions, eating processed food, neglecting their sleep, so on and so on. And what happens is, over years, all of those different stresses will take their toll on the body's internal systems, and it will essentially become burnt out and inefficient. And this will make a lot more sense as we progress through this training. So what then happens is, a lot of guys will come to a point where they'll kind of just blame their age for a sluggish metabolism, when it's not really their age at all. It's the fact they haven't really taken care of themselves. So we're going to talk about that, and it's going to become more and more relevant as we progress through this training. So why should you listen to me? Right? So the truth is, you don't have to listen to me if you don't want to. I'm just here sharing information that I've used from working with over 1,000 guys on the topic of, health optimization, but also fat loss. And I'll show you a few clients that we've worked with in terms of the fat loss progress we've been able to achieve. I'll get them to pop up on screen, hopefully somewhere around here. So you can kind of get an idea as to what we do with clients and how we've used the processes and the ideas I'm going to talk about today to achieve these kind of results, and how you can do the same if you kind of, take note of the information I share today and implement it, which is ultimately the most important thing. So I think, we're going to stick with the topic of fat loss as closely as possible today, because, there's going to be a lot of opportunities for me to get sidetracked into different areas of health, but I'm going to try and keep it really, really, focused towards fat loss, because that is the topic of today. So let's start at the very, very basics. With what fat actually is. This is really important to understand a little bit of the physiology, so bear with me. I'm going to talk about a little bit of the physiology of fat and other systems in the body, because it will make complete sense when it comes to the mechanisms and the routines and habits we're going to implement to speed up those processes, right? So what is fat? So fat is essentially an excess storage depot, an excess storage system, facility, if you will, that houses excess energy. So when we eat too many calories, we produce adipose tissue, and that holds onto fat. And that essentially means that we've got this excess storage of energy that, unless we are in that deficit of calories, which I'm sure you've already all heard of, we're not going to lose all the fat we need to lose. Now, that being said, it is a myth that you cannot lose fat if you're not in a deficit, right? I'm going to talk about exactly how you do this, but it is very true that you're probably not going to get the body that you want if you don't put yourself into a calorie deficit. Because of that, you have this excess storage of energy stored in your fat, and unless you put yourself in that deficit where you are burning more than you are consuming, then essentially the body has no need to, in the long term, keep tapping into that excess fat storage. Now, again, there are certain circumstances in which you can improve your body composition. It's actually fairly easy to do, improve body composition without being in a deficit, but a deficit of calories is always going to be the foundation. So fat is essentially an excess energy storage system, and a calorie deficit is always going to be essential for that. Now, we're going to talk a little bit of physiology, because it's going to be super important to understand when it comes to some of the things we're going to talk about. So it's so important to understand that fat loss is essentially a 3-stage process on a biological level. That process involves, firstly, lipolysis. Lipolysis is basically the liberation of the triglyceride from the adipose tissue, from the fat cell. Again, bear with me on this. It will make sense, and it will be valuable, hopefully. So it's the liberation of the triglyceride, which is the fat in its stored form in the triglyceride. If we can't liberate it efficiently, then we can't essentially transport it, which is phase 2, and then we can't burn it as energy, which is phase 3, which we'll talk about now. Stage 2 of that process is transportation. So we're gonna, once that triglyceride has been liberated. It's going to get broken down into free fatty acids and glycerol, and then that's going to be bound, the free fatty acids are going to be bound to a protein called albumin, transferred through the blood. It's going to be taken to the cells where it is going to be oxidized through a process called beta oxidation through the mitochondria, and that's essentially where you turn that fat into an energy source, and then you are burning fat, right? Really simple. I'd like to think really simple. It's a three-stage system. We have to understand that though that three-step system is going to be influenced by many, many different aspects of health, many different systems. In fact, every system, whether directly or indirectly, will play a part in that process. So what are the major systems involved in fat loss? Obviously, you have your endocrine system. So your endocrine system is things, basically your hormones, you know, things like growth hormone, things like thyroid hormone. Obviously, thyroid regulates your metabolism. Things like testosterone. All of these are going to play an essential role in, you know, energy expenditure and that three-step process of fat loss. So understanding this, the nervous system is very important for fat loss too. Gut, not just from a kind of absorption point of view, like how do we absorb nutrients which are going to facilitate this process, but also because a lot of issues arise in the gut. So if you have gut issues, you're going to have issues in terms of inflammation, toxicity, all of this stuff, high levels of inflammation, which again we will talk about, and toxic burden can hinder your ability to, you know, achieve lipolysis, because the fat is essentially a bit of a protective mechanism. It can hold things like inflammation and things like toxins away from affecting the internal systems of the body. So if we have a body that is heavily overburdened by those things, it will hold on to fat tissue as a means to prevent those toxins and that inflammation affecting the most important systems in the body, which is the organs. So one of the key things we need to do is understand where our toxic load is and where our inflammatory load is, and address those first and foremost, and that will make this three-step process much more efficient. Liver's super important for hormone production, you know, cholesterol production, also important for thyroid production, also important for metabolizing all of your three macronutrients. So very, very important in that process of energy metabolism. Cardiovascular health, of course, very, very important too. So long story short, we're just talking foundations at the moment. Long story short, the health of your body is super important in the process of fat loss. This is why we will always want to understand where your body is at from a symptoms perspective and from a blood work perspective before you start on a process. Because if you have dysfunction, if your body is heavily stressed, if you have gut issues, if you have anything going on, and then you put yourself into a deficit of calories, you know, what that will do is, especially if you're doing it long term, that will actually increase stress on the body, and it won't just slow down your fat loss, but it will make it so much harder. You'll be fighting more hunger, you'll be fighting less motivation, you'll be fighting less energy, and it's just going to, you know, build really, really loose foundations from the very, very start. So always, always, always start your process by addressing your health first. You can do this at the same time. Often that's the best way to do it anyway, especially if you're carrying a lot of excess fat. But you always need to understand where your body is at and address those systems. And again, I can talk about each of those systems individually in other videos, and I promise to do that. But for now, let's stick with fat. Let's talk about some common fat loss blocks. So again, we've spoken about these different issues you can have in systems, but I'd say some of the most common issues you will have that will affect things like that, the ability of your body to liberate fat from the cells, is things like low hormone function. Again, we spoke about thyroid, we spoke about testosterone. Growth hormone will affect metabolism a lot. Metabolic issues, issues with insulin. When insulin levels are high, if you have things like insulin resistance or, just poor glucose management, you've got high insulin, that actually blocks lipolysis. So it makes liberating fat from the cells much more difficult. So what we need to do under those circumstances is work on your hormones, work on your metabolic health, help yourself to control those glucose levels. Bear in mind, again, this happens if you do it right. It happens in tandem with the fat loss process anyway. So it's not like you have to do that first and then the other one. You just want to make sure you're programming accordingly to address the issues as you go along the process. Otherwise, you'll hit a wall very quickly. Mitochondrial issues. We spoke about the process of oxidation through that process of beta oxidation. That happens through the mitochondria. And if you have issues within your mitochondria, those fat burning organelles within your cells, the things that really turn your nutrients into energy, then you're going to have an inefficient ability to produce energy, and again, it will slow down this whole process. So supporting your mitochondria, really, really important too. So that's just an overview of like the foundations. We've spoken about fat, we spoke about the foundation, spoke about why health is important, and just how you set yourself up for the process. Let's dive into the strategy of actually, achieving the results that you want to achieve with your fat loss, right? So the first things first, assess your health and address your health. Address any issues. Again, you can do this in tandem. We've spoken about that. The most important thing for you to understand when you want to optimize your fat loss results, right? And we're going to get onto the actual physiological optimization soon, but I want to talk about psychologically. I want to talk about, how you actually set yourself up for success when it comes to setting yourself, a target. It all comes with creating a timeline. One of the biggest mistakes guys will make is they don't set themselves clear, defined timelines for fat loss. They just say, I want to lose, 10 kilos, no end date, no urgency, nothing at all. And it just goes on forever. They lose motivation, and most of them never get there. What we need to be doing is we need to create a clear timeline of realistically how much should we be losing? How much do we want to be losing? Bear in mind, most people have to lose more fat than they think. So set your target and maybe add on a good amount, and then that will be your expectation of how much you have to lose, right? No one ever overestimates how much fat they have to lose. They always underestimate. So we need to create a timeline. Now, if you have, let's say, like 30% body fat to lose, you're not going to be able to do that in one go. And I'm going to tell you why. You're going to have to break this up into multiple timelines. So what happens when you diet for long periods of time, right, is the body, at first it's very beneficial, right? Many beneficial processes will take place. But then when you diet for long periods of time, and I'm talking, again, this depends on the start point, a 40% body fat individual is going to be different to a 15% body fat individual, because it's all about what the excess energy storage is. But if you diet for long periods of time, what happens is the body eventually goes into a state where it starts to think, oh, well, I'm actually in danger. This is unsafe. I'm actually into starvation. Please don't misunderstand this as this starvation mode people talk about, where the body, no longer loses weight even though it's in a deficit. But there is certain truth to that. So when you're in a diet period for a long period of time, what happens is the body then goes, oh shit, I feel like, I've not got enough energy to survive. I need to start becoming more efficient at storing energy, holding on to energy, and preserving the energy that we have. So what it will do is start to down-regulate any non-essential systems. That is things like testosterone will start to drop. Thyroid function will start to drop. Growth hormone will start to drop. Leptin, which is the hormone, so you've got two hormones, you've got leptin and ghrelin. Ghrelin will tell you that you're hungry, will make you hungrier. Leptin will make you feel satisfied. So when leptin levels are high, you'll feel more satisfied. What happens as you diet for long periods of time is your ghrelin and leptin balance starts to shift. So ghrelin is going to be pushed right up, while leptin is going to come down, and that's going to make you very, very hungry. It's going to make you crave a hell of a lot more. And then you're also fighting the fact that your progress is slower from a decline in metabolism from, testosterone and thyroid and growth hormone being lower, and all these adaptations taking place in order to essentially keep you alive in the eyes of your body, but it doesn't facilitate long-term fat loss. So what happens with most people is they may make a load of progress for 12, 15, 16 weeks, but then they'll hit a wall, they'll lose focus, motivation will kind of dwindle, and they just kind of fall off the wagon. If we understand that this is what happens, and this process is called metabolic adaptation, the metabolism adapts by making these changes. If we understand that this happens, then what we can do is program for that. And what you want to do with that, we spoke about timelines, is you want to set multiple timelines. If you have a high amount of body fat to lose, you're going to have to do split this into multiple timelines, maybe 2, maybe even 3 if you've got enough. So basically, you tend to want to diet for about somewhere between 8 and 12 weeks before you do what is called a diet break. Inside the Alpha 21 program, we call these metabolic resets. Why we do this is because when you diet, you start to get this down regulation. A metabolic reset, a diet break, helps you bring safety to the body so it can start to uplift these systems again. And it kind of goes, oh, okay, maybe I'm not dying. So then it pushes up thyroid output, pushes up testosterone, and just regulates everything again. So rather than trying to diet for like 6 months, 12 months straight, what you want to do is work 12 weeks, do what is called a metabolic reset to lift things back up, and then it will make the next 12 weeks much easier. If you don't do that, you don't do any diet breaks, you don't do any metabolic resets, you'll just kind of dwindle all the way down, and most people fall off the wagon, as I've said. So understanding timelines, one, because you want to set yourself targets. So a really good target of weight loss is around 1% of your body weight per week. Now, if you implement everything I'm going to say, you can lose more than that. However, 1% is a really good target to lose. So if you're a 100 kilo individual, losing a kilo a week is pretty perfect. Bear in mind, again, if you're following what I'm going to take you through here, you're going to lose that entirely from body fat, not from muscle tissue, which is a big issue a lot of people will have. Is they'll lose weight, but they'll lose a lot of tissue and they'll just look skinny. If you do what I'm going to tell you to do here, you're not going to do that. If anything, you can actually build tissue during this. I know a lot of people say you can't do that, but you can if you do this properly. And I'm going to talk to you about how. So aim to lose about 1% of your body weight per week. That's a good goal. Do these things and you'll lose it from the right areas. All right, so we're going to talk about the foundations first, which probably, if you're into health and fitness, this is just going to be a lot of the same old stuff that you've already heard before. So I'm going to go over it fairly quickly, and I'm going to give you some basic targets to hit with this. So depending on how fast you want to get results, and you've got to factor in your lifestyle. If you're going to be going out every week, multiple times drinking, you're probably going to have to set yourself a lesser deficit of about 10%. All right, you remember the deficit is foundational in getting the fat off. We have to have that long term. You can, have what's called recomposition, where even if you don't lose weight, you lose fat and you build muscle and you look leaner, but you're never going to lose like all of your fat doing that. And it's definitely not a long-term fix to the problem. And the way we do that, I'll just talk about that briefly, is you do that through increasing nutrient partitioning. So let's say you eat 2,000 calories now. If you have poor nutrient partitioning, you're going to have a large percentage of that, being stored as body fat. If you have a good nutrient partitioning, which is going to be achieved through doing what I'm going to talk about in a minute, then you will drive the same amount of calories will be driven into muscle tissue to develop more tissue and be stored as glycogen inside the muscle tissue. All right, so you can improve your, body composition without, even when you're, in a growing phase, in a surplus of calories, you can do that. But you're probably not gonna, that's not gonna be the priority, right? You wanna make sure you are in that deficit. If you wanna see, you wanna see significant changes and you wanna get in really, really good shape, you need to be in deficit. Now, somewhere between a 10 and 30% deficit. So obviously in order to find this out, you're gonna have to work out what your expenditure is. Really briefly on this, I don't wanna kind of, you just go right back to the basics, but essentially, find your baseline. You can just find a calculator online. There's the Harris-Benedict formula, which is probably one of the most accurate ones. Give yourself a good starting point based on the macronutrients I'm going to talk about, and try it for a couple of weeks. See how your body responds. If you lose weight, you're in a good deficit. If you lose the target 1%, you're in a good deficit. If you don't lose weight, you need to pull the calories down. Super, super simple. All right. Any calorie estimate is always an estimate to start with until you find that baseline by just adapting and adjusting as you go. Simple. But let's talk about the foundations. If you want to lose weight fast, do a 30% deficit. If you want to lose it slower, it's a little bit more flexible, you have a little bit more freedom, then 10%. Somewhere in the middle would be obviously 20%. But what we want to factor in is what are you like mentally? Like personally, a lot of the guys we work with, they want to see results quickly, so round about 25% deficit to start with to get enough momentum, to get the kind of buy-in. Like when you start to see results, you'll be fully invested and you'll want to do all the rest, and then it will just kind of build momentum from there. It will make the process so much easier. So 10 to 30% deficit, really simple. You're going to need to take in, again, really foundational work here, about 1.2 or more grams of protein per kilo body weight. Now, what we have to understand is when we're dieting and we're in a deficit, your body's in a state of breaking things down, right? Now, it will break fats, it will break proteins, it will break carbohydrates down, but we want to make sure we're getting enough protein to offset any kind of amino acid breakdown that is going to be happening through obviously the training we do, but also in the deficit it's going to happen more. So we actually need to go higher protein in a diet than ever before, because when we're having like a lot of food, especially like high amounts of carbohydrates, it's going to spare a lot of those amino acids because we're going to utilize the carbs as a primary energy source, and actually you don't need as much protein because of that. So when we're dieting, carbs are going to be lower, calories are going to be lower. We need more protein. So a lot of people will say 1 pound per kilo body weight. And again, this is a lot to do with the lean mass of the individual. Someone leaner is going to need more. Someone, much heavier in terms of body fat levels is going to need less. But to be safe, between 1.2 and 1.4 grams of protein per kilo of your body weight. Again, 100 kilo individual, 1.2, would be about 240 grams of protein per day. So that's more than what a lot of people would say. Again, it depends on the leanness and body composition of yourself. But that's a good rough starting point. You can even go higher. Bear in mind, protein has the highest thermic effect, meaning that you burn more calories consuming protein than any of the other macronutrients. All right, so that's another bonus to us. It's also much better for satiety and making sure you are, feeling full and not constantly feeling hungry all the time and craving, because the certain elements in your gut actually react to the amino acids and protein and start to, feed back to the body that you're actually full. Whereas like carbohydrates can actually have the opposite effect. It doesn't mean don't have them, but we're going to talk about how to use them in the right way. So, we spoke about the types of protein. Simple. We're going to go back into the training in a minute, but foundation of strength training, when you're losing weight, we need to be strength training for hypertrophy, for muscle growth. Otherwise, what's going to happen is you're going to lose muscle tissue, which is not what we want to do. We want to prioritize muscle tissue that will keep your metabolism working away. Again, these are all the foundational stuff that we have to have in place before we get into the optimization tools. Strength training, within reason, as much as you can. Like when I say as much as you can, 4 times a week is perfect. 3 to 5 times is ideal. You can do 5, you can do like 6, but you're going to really need to optimize your recovery. 7 is just, no, you don't want to do that because you need to give not just your tissue enough time, but your nervous system needs to recover too. So, strength training, very, very important. Sleep, super important. I'll throw a statistic at you, which will probably shock you, but also hopefully make you focus on your sleep. For those who sleep less than 6.5 hours per night, they will burn roughly between 400 and 500 calories less over the space of a day on average than someone who sleeps more than 7 hours per night. All right, so super, super important. I actually think it's 6 hours. So those who sleep less than 6 hours per night will burn on average 400 to 500 less calories per day than someone who sleeps less than 7. That's not just from the direct effect on metabolism, but it's from, what will happen is if you haven't slept, your body will, subconsciously want you to move less, and therefore you will get less of an expenditure through the day. You won't put quite as much into your training because you haven't got that. Your body's trying to prioritize energy preservation. So really, really important. Get your sleep right first. That's going to facilitate your metabolism being healthy, growth hormone levels, thyroid, the lot, and everything else. That's going to be really, really important. And then other foundation is increase your NEAT levels, which is basically just being more active. So NEAT, basically, it stands for non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So this basically describes the calories you'll burn from doing day-to-day things. So actually what I'm doing now, which is, I'm quite expressive when I talk. So like my hand movement, my arms moving here is burning calories. The more I do this, the more calories I'm going to burn. All right. Whereas a lot of people, they kind of just stand very, very still and they're going to burn the minimal amount of calories. And you'll notice these people who are, naturally less expressive will store a lot more fat. They'll tend to struggle with their weight a lot more because you actually burn a hell of a lot of calories just doing stuff like this. Now you can't change your personality, arguable, but you're probably not going to have a massive impact on that. But what you can do is just be more active in day-to-day stuff. Choose to, get active, do things in your garden, choose to go on walks, choose to just be more active rather than picking, those sedentary activities where you're sat watching TV and so on and so on. Right? So really simple stuff. They're the foundations. We spoke about diet breaks. We need to put them in planned and, in smart ways. We need to program them in smart ways. The leaner you are, the shorter you can push for. The more body fat you have, the longer those dieting phases can be before you need a diet break or metabolic reset. Quickly on the training front, we're just going to go over this really quickly, and we'll talk about the nutrition quickly so you have some clear targets to work to. Training wants to be roughly, again, these are just rough targets, 70% hypertrophy-based training, that's muscle building. all right? 20% zone 2 cardio. I'm going to talk about zone 2. It's an incredible tool for increasing fat loss. And I'll talk about why that is. And then about 10% of high intensity training, cardiovascular training. And what that will do is that will train all of your main systems. And again, the healthier you are across, healthier and more optimal you are across each of those systems, the better you're going to perform across the board. So if you increase your cardiovascular system by putting some HIIT in there, you'll actually perform better with your strength training and your zone 2 training, and you'll be able to utilize energy much more efficiently by doing that. So that would look maybe like 4 strength sessions a week. You could throw some zone 2 on at the end or do some in the morning. And then maybe once or twice per week, you just do some short HIIT interval trainings to really test the cardiovascular system. Simple. Nutrition. Again, we spoke about the 1.2 to 1.4 grams of protein per kilo body weight. Let's talk about fats. Fats are going to be required particularly for many different functions of the body, but in particular maintaining healthy hormones, which is going to be key, as we've spoken about before. Take about 25% of your total calorie intake from fats. 20 is probably the bottom end. A lot of people say 20 is fine. I prefer to have more towards like 25. And then you're going to have the remaining calories. Once you've worked out the once you've worked out the amount of calories taken, you're going to have the remaining calories from carbohydrates, and they're going to be prioritized around pre-workout and post-workout. All right, because that's going to fuel your training, and then it's going to fuel the recovery, the replenishment of the glycogen in your tissue for the next time you come around to train. All right, simple. They're the foundations. That's your simple strategy for setting yourself up to optimize your fat loss. Now let's go into the optimization strategy. So all the things that most people won't talk about, which actually have tremendous benefit to make the process of improving body composition better. So a lot of this I'm going to talk about here won't necessarily improve weight loss, but it improves the partitioning rate, meaning you're going to get leaner much quicker. You're going to lose stubborn body fat much quicker, because what we're doing is improving this, and we're also improving the partitioning rate. So taking the same amount of food, but putting it into better areas. So let's talk about this. NEAT we've spoken about. So like the great thing about NEAT, like moving at lower intensities, is because it is the great thing about it for fat loss is that it's working within your lower zones, lower energy zones, meaning you are tapping into entirely lipids and fats for your energy source. So when you go out walking, so long as you're in zone 2 or below, you're going to be utilizing fats as your energy. So the more you can push this, the more you can get active, where you're not overexerting, the more you're going to tap into fat, and you'll get lean very quickly. So set yourself a very high step count and just decide while you're losing the fat to be as active as you possibly can in those lower energy thresholds, those lower energy areas. Cold exposure, right? So this is an interesting one. A lot of people have like their kind of like qualms with this one. They kind of say like, well, does it actually work? It really does work. So you've obviously got like the Gary Breckers who will say, it's the best thing to burn fat ever. That's not true. And then you've got, others who will say like, it can affect the body in various ways. You've got other people who will say that it doesn't do anything, and it's kind of in between. So it does have a very positive effect. I've used it on myself. It works. I've used it with clients. It really does work. And the way that it works is because when you put your body under, the stress of extremely cold temperatures, it has to stimulate certain processes to increase body temperature. Now, this isn't going to happen like, Gary Brecker likes to talk about, which is basically it's going to enhance your metabolism in ridiculous ways and help you to produce this much heat and so on and so on. But what it is going to do is help you to stimulate what is called brown adipose tissue. And this is like a certain form of fat, which is highly metabolic. And when it's got a lot of mitochondria, we spoke about the importance of mitochondria in fat burning. When you stimulate your brown adipose tissue, what happens is you increase that metabolic rate. Your body is forced to produce heat, and it really does help with stubborn fat loss, and it helps with mitochondrial health, and it does help you get lean. I use it quite a lot, but you don't want to overdo it, because when you're doing cold exposure, it's got to be done properly. So for example, I do cold showers every morning, not for this purpose. I don't call that, I do about 2 minutes in a cold shower every morning. I don't call that cold therapy. I don't call that cold exposure, although it is. It's not like overly intense. If I was doing it for fat loss, I would try and do about 5 minutes fully submerged up to the neck in very cold temperatures. So to the point that I start to shiver, and that will have the the biggest effect on fat loss. It's very, very good for this. It really is. And you should try it if you've never tried it for this process. The next optimization technique is protein fasts or carb cycling. You've probably heard of carb cycling, but it's probably no secret that when you remove carbs out of your diet, your body can utilize fats as the primary energy source much more efficiently. So why people do carb cycling. So carb cycling, in short, is basically you pull carbs out for a few days. It can be typically 2 to 4 days, and then you'll bring carbs back in. During those 4 days, you'll tap into your lipids much better and you'll burn fat. It really does work. Again, you tend to go a little bit lower calories than you do higher days with carbs in for 3 days or 2 days or whatever it is, and then so on. That's how people typically carb cycle. It works, it's efficient. We've had amazing success with the right people. It tends to be, who this works for tends to be like based on their lifestyle. Like if you're super busy, carb cycling can be great because like Monday to Thursday, for example, you can have quite low calories. Keep your carbs out, and then you can load up calories. Now, what's important to understand is your training is going to want to change on those lower carb days because you're not going to be able to push in the same way. So you're probably wanting to go for kind of like a little bit higher reps, not pushing your major like big lifts on those days, and removing the stress from the nervous system by just doing kind of like a bit lighter sessions with higher reps and less load. Protein fasts are something that we use with clients a lot and get incredible success with. Again, depending on the person, you don't have to use these, but they are very efficient. And this basically involves 1 or 2 days of purely protein with a little bit of fiber to aid digestion. But like what this would look like is you have a plan as usual. You're in a minimal deficit, maybe like a 20 to 10% deficit. But then 2 days a week, you will go very low calories and all you will consume is protein, but a very high amount of protein. Remember, it will have a massive thermic effect, burning a lot of calories. And then because you've taken out fats will be very low and carbs are out entirely. What will happen on those days is your body will be very efficient at utilizing fat as the energy source, right? You've brought your protein in there to safeguard yourself from losing any tissue, which is absolutely essential. That's why you need enough of that. Otherwise, you'll just lose tissue. But you have protein, you take out the fats, and you take out the carbs. So what the body has to do is it has to utilize fats, and this will help you to get lean very, very quickly. It also allows you to follow a very, very low calorie diet for a couple of days, and you feel pretty good. Most people feel pretty good doing this. I don't feel overly hungry. Now, what's important to understand is on those super low days, you're probably not going to do, as I said with the carb cycling, you're probably not going to do any crazy. You're probably not going to do any crazy, training sessions, high intensity sessions. It's going to, again, be zone 2, which we're going to talk about in a second as one of your mechanisms. Zone 2 is particularly good because it's the very upper end of your fat burning zones. And when you're already in a state where your body is primed for fat, you can do zone 2 on those days. It's low intensity, it's very manageable, and you will again optimize the process of burning fat. And again, you get lean very quickly doing this. Time restricted eating, a lot of people will know this as intermittent fasting. It's not really the same thing. What it basically means is you just delay your first meal and then you pull back your last meal. You don't have to follow an overly strict window of 6 hours where you eat all your meals. But this can be beneficial for many reasons. It's beneficial for hunger more than anything. Just delaying that first meal allows hunger to be much more controlled. Most people are fine in the mornings up until they eat their first meal and then they kind of start to feel hungry. So delay that first meal. This can be very beneficial for gut health. It can be very beneficial for metabolic health. So improving like insulin sensitivity is very good for that as well, which is important. We spoke about the effect of any insulin, elevations in insulin on lipolysis, so it's important for that. And it's important, it benefits many processes, and I do use this with a lot of guys, especially if they do have metabolic issues. It's just shortening that window and giving themselves a bit of a fasting window. It's not intermittent fasting, although you can call it that if you want. It's called time restricted eating. You eat your meals within a certain window and just give yourself a good period of time before sleep, which is super important because if you eat too close to bedtime, it will disrupt your sleep massively and growth hormone levels will be less and cortisol will be higher and so on. Make sure you're not doing that. And then obviously having some form of fast in the morning. So you give yourself a good window of time where your body can just be without food and be in that fasted state is really, really powerful too. Let's talk about thyroid support. So obviously, like as we spoke about, like there's many I'm not going to go into all the supplements you could use. Essentially, we want to support all of your systems throughout the process of fat loss, but one of the most important is thyroid. It will start to kind of down-regulate as you go, so it's just as a safeguard, while losing fat, I would always prioritize thyroid support. So the thyroid basically requires iodine, it requires L-tyrosine, and it requires selenium. All right, and that's to help the whole process of production of thyroid in the thyroid gland and the conversion of thyroid into its active form, T3, in various tissues, mainly in the liver. That requires, a certain enzymatic process relying on selenium. So just making sure you have enough of these things in your diet. L-tyrosine is fairly simple. It's going to be in a lot of protein sources anyway. But iodine, you just might want to take, don't supplement on iodine, but maybe just taking some kelp. Kelp is the highest food source of iodine. Also like nori, which is basically like the seaweed that you wrap sushi in. That can be good. Selenium, Brazil nuts are the highest food source of selenium, but also just having a selenium supplement might be useful. So a kelp and selenium supplement. L-tyrosine, now, again, you'll probably get enough L-tyrosine. In fact, you will from just consuming enough protein. However, supplementing on L-tyrosine is very, very powerful for hunger suppression because it's a precursor to dopamine. When you raise dopamine levels, it's going to help you manage your hunger levels much better. So having L-tyrosine in there as a supplement, not as a long-term solution, but as a short-term thing, when you are very hungry, you can just take 500 to 1,000 milligrams of L-tyrosine as a bit of a hunger suppressant. It can be a very powerful tool. We use this a lot with guys who are really struggling to battle hunger, which is one of the most difficult challenges when it comes to fat loss, is being able to control your caloric intake. So anything we can use in those circumstances is very, very good. Something I haven't put on this board, which is also very good to kind of help you maintain energy, motivation. It also has some impact on the hunger side of things, more from a neurological standpoint, is methylene blue. So 5 milligrams of methylene blue will help with mitochondrial health, which again is helping with all of this, but mainly it just helps you stay energized throughout the process of fat loss, which is very important for maintaining the momentum that we need, right? So methylene blue at 5 milligrams is really good. We spoke about zone 2. So zone 2 for me is a very, very powerful tool to speed up fat loss. And the great thing about zone 2 is you can pretty much do as much of it as you like. Because it's not overly stressful on the body. You can kind of do, half an hour every day. You could do an hour every day if you wanted to, and it wouldn't really fatigue the body too much. Obviously, you still need to prioritize recovery, but the great thing about it is it's at the very top end of the fat burning zones, right? If you move into zone 3 and start running, which will push you into that glucose use, you'll start to utilize glucose and carbohydrate as your main energy source at that point, then you're not tapping into fat anymore. So having as much zone 2 in there as possible will help you to get lean very quickly. It's one of the best tools you can use. And we can even use things like what I'm going to talk about here, like certain supplementation to get more out of the zone 2. The things I'm going to talk about in a minute don't have to be used purely for zone 2, but they can help that process. So like caffeine pre-exercise can be very, very powerful for basically preparing triglycerides to be used as energy. All right, so having like a black coffee, I don't suggest we use any kind of pre-workouts. A black coffee pre-cardio in the morning or strength session, again, not too late at night because you don't want to disrupt your sleep, can be very, very powerful fat loss tool. L-carnitine in its injectable form is super powerful. We use this with a lot of the guys. I use this most days for myself. And why I use L-carnitine, it's got many benefits, but one of the benefits it has is helping your body to improve the oxidation of free fatty acids in the mitochondria to be burned, basically. It improves that process and makes it way more efficient. So L-carnitine in injectable form, oral form is nowhere near as powerful, is a very, very powerful tool for improving body composition changes very quickly. And if you do that pre-cardio, it's incredible. In fact, I'm going to throw a few of these together. If you do a protein fast day, you do an hour zone 2 with things like yohimbine, which I'll talk about in a minute, and L-carnitine, and maybe some of the peptides I'll go through here, you can burn body fat at a crazy rate. And I'll show you again some of the guys that we've got results with doing these processes. But these are really, really powerful. Yohimbine is similar. It's going to help with that process. It's going to help the nervous system liberate more triglycerides to be used as energy. Yohimbine's a really powerful one. It's a natural fat burner. It's one of the only ones that really actually has benefit. The one thing you just got to be cautious with yohimbine is it can increase blood pressure. So if you are someone who has high blood pressure, you probably don't want to take yohimbine. You certainly want to talk to your doctor before just going in and taking it. But yohimbine is a great, it really helps with fat loss and improving body composition. Just be cautious with any cardiovascular issues. The final thing I'm going to talk about is peptides. Now, peptides are fairly new in terms of discussions and in terms of a lot of the kind of data coming out, but they are showing incredible benefits towards pretty much every aspect of health, but certain ones, and I'm going to talk about the ones we've used with a lot of guys and I've used personally, have an incredible benefit working through various mechanisms to improve, again, the mitochondrial aspect of fat loss, but also stimulating growth hormone levels, which will help with that metabolism, which, bear in mind, growth hormone will start to decrease after 30. So we need to do all we can to support that. It's going to be around sleep, but these peptides are essentially, they kind of fill the gap, allowing us to produce whatever the peptide is, targeting, more of that more naturally. So how a lot of the ones, for example, like things like ipamorelin is a really good one we've used. CJC is another one we've used, really, really good. MOTS works through the mitochondrial, avenue. The others work through like the growth hormone avenue. So they help speed up the body, improve body composition in quite remarkable ways when you throw them in. All right. There's also some other newer ones that you can kind of reach out to me. I can talk to you about those as well. But the ones there are the ones I've used. I particularly like L-carnitine. It's not a peptide, but it's an amino acid, very powerful. I like caffeine. I like yohimbine, and I like a selection of those other 3 peptides, which are incredibly powerful for speeding up fat loss. Now, I'm going to kind of just tie this all together, guys. Like, I've given you the foundations of how to start, what you need to understand before you go, like just understanding what fat loss is. I've talked about the basic strategy, the simple overall strategy of what you need to think about. You've probably covered that if you're into your health at all. There's the basics of protein training, all that kind of stuff. And then we've added in some kind of optimization tools for you to factor in. Now, one thing I want to say, guys, is this stuff is great. All of this optimization stuff is great, but it doesn't work if your health is in the gutter and you haven't got the foundations in place. It really doesn't. So you have to get the deficit. You have to address your health. You have to, understand what needs to be addressed early doors, and you have to do all the foundations of the right macros, the right training, training hard, all of that stuff. But if you do that, and you implement the optimization tactics I've spoken about here, and you can put that in for a prolonged period of time, 6 to 12 weeks, the results you will see, I guarantee you, will be incredible, and you'll actually be surprised at how quickly you can actually lose weight, right? And burn, not just lose weight, all right, but actually change your body composition and trim body fat levels down at, like I say, quite an alarming rate, right? So hopefully, guys, that makes sense to you. Hopefully you've got value from everything that we've spoken about here. And hopefully you've taken a lot away from this that you can actually implement into your own routine and start seeing some of the results that, we've kind of shown you on here, if that is an area you've been struggling with. So yeah, I'm going to tie it all up there, guys. And if you have any questions on this, as usual, please don't hesitate to reach out or drop a comment on this video. And yeah, I look forward to catching up.